Steelers Nation, the conversation around this team has been heating up every single week. And with so many questions flying around about the current roster, it feels like the perfect moment to take a step back and look at this squad with a clear lens. Fans keep wondering whether this group is strong enough in each area to push the team toward a winning season. And it is interesting how often that simple phrase comes up. Are they good enough? Not legendary, not all-time great, not stacked from top to bottom like those iconic Super Bowl rosters from decades ago, but simply good enough to win the league right now if the coaching staff maximizes what they have on the field. That is the big idea. Not perfection, not dominance, just being solid at the right spots so the team can function at a high level. Starting with the offensive line, it is hard not to notice how much this group has evolved. There were moments earlier in the season when the chemistry looked shaky, but the growth has been steady and noticeable. The unit has enough talent and physicality to compete every week, especially with young pieces developing and veterans holding the structure together. When you look at the potential and the direction this line is heading, it is easy to say they are more than just passable. They are building toward being a cornerstone of the team's identity. If everything continues trending upward, they could be one of those lines that dictate the pace of games rather than react to it. At tight end, the situation feels even easier to evaluate. The mix of size, athleticism, reliable hands, and blocking ability gives this group everything a modern offense needs at the position. They're not just filling a role. They're strengthening the offense in ways that show up in both the passing attack and the ground game. There are teams across the league that would love to have this kind of tight end room as a starting point, and that says a lot about how stable this position is right now. If you were building an offense from scratch, you would gladly take what this team has here without hesitation. Wide receiver, however, tells a completely different story. The ceiling just does not match what teams need in today's league, where explosive plays and mismatches dictate the rhythm of the game. The top option flashes moments, but does not consistently tilt the field the way a true number one wideout should. And the supporting cast feels more suited for complementary roles rather than leading the charge. There is effort, there is talent, but there is not that spark that makes defensive coordinators lose sleep. A modern passing game cannot rely solely on efficiency or careful distribution. You need threats. You need someone who forces defenses to adjust. Right now, that simply is not happening. Running back, on the other hand, feels stable and dependable. There may not be a superstar in this group, but there is a combination of toughness, vision, and versatility that gives the offense something to lean on when the passing attack stalls. The young backs are still carving out their identity, but the energy and consistency from the established contributors help raise the overall quality of the room. You do not need an elite group here to run a functional offense. You need backs who can read lanes, break tackles, pass protect, and keep defenses honest. And this room checks those boxes without stretching itself thin. Quarterback is the trickiest position to evaluate right now. There were stretches earlier in the season when everything looked sharper, more controlled, and more confident, and it felt like the team finally had the stability it needed. But the inconsistency since then makes the picture much harder to define. One week the releases are crisp and the decisions are fast. The next week the timing looks off and the rhythm disappears. Depth behind the starter is not the question, because the backups are exactly what you want in terms of preparedness and reliability. The question is whether the starter on the field can maintain a level of play that elevates the offense instead of just keeping it afloat. The answer is not clear yet, and it may take another game or two before you can confidently say where that position stands. What makes evaluating the offense even more interesting is imagining how dramatically things could shift with elite quarterback play. Some of these position groups would instantly take on a new identity if a top-tier passer was at the helm. That is not a criticism of the current starter, but more a recognition of how much a great quarterback can lift everyone around him. A strong line becomes dominant. A solid tight end room becomes elite. A decent wide receiver becomes a near Pro Bowl talent. That is the ripple effect a special quarterback brings, and it is a reminder of how crucial consistency and leadership under center truly are in the modern game. Even when shifting away from the offensive positions, it is impossible not to think about how each unit fits the bigger picture. Specialists often get overlooked, but the group here is reliable and has shown flashes of being one of the better combinations in the league. Even with a rough performance sprinkled in, the talent and track record suggest stability, which is exactly what you want from that part of the roster. As for the defensive front, that is where things shift from good enough to genuinely outstanding. A unit packed with power, intelligence, and dynamic ability. The edge rushers create constant pressure. The interior defenders collapse pockets and clog lanes, and the rotation allows them to stay fresh deep into games. You can feel their presence every time they take the field, even when the results are not perfect. They're the kind of group that can tilt momentum in the blink of an eye. When you shift deeper into the heart of the defense, the conversation gets even more interesting because the off-the-ball linebacker group sits in that space where you can see both the strengths and the areas that still need polishing. It is not a position overflowing with all-pro names, but is also not a weakness dragging the defense down. The athleticism is there, the instincts are developing, and the hunger in this group is obvious. There's a sense that with just a bit more refinement, they could become one of those quietly dependable units that never get the national spotlight, but always show up when the team needs a key tackle or a timely read. Some players bring more splash than others, but even the quieter performers hold their ground well enough to keep the defense balanced. You do not need superstars tagging every snap. You need players who understand their assignments, avoid mistakes, and grow from rep to rep, and this room fits that description. The young linebacker who has been climbing steadily might be the biggest wild card here. He flashes traits that separate real playmakers from average contributors. And even though his game still has the occasional inconsistency, the trajectory is undeniable. Give him more experience, more responsibility, and he might jump tiers sooner than expected. There are not many players at his age who combine that level of physicality with the ability to diagnose plays of the line. It is easy to imagine that in another year, he will not just be good enough, but potentially one of the defining pieces of this defense. Safety brings another layer of complexity because the talent is absolutely present, yet the fit of the group raises questions. You can see the intelligence, the tackling, and the physical edge in the way they approach each snap. The issue is that several players share overlapping skill sets, creating a situation where the versatility does not fully match the needs of the system. Instead of having a mix where one dominates in coverage while another roams the box, the group leans heavily toward physical downhill defenders. That is not inherently a bad thing, but it limits some of the matchup flexibility you would ideally want against modern offenses that stretch the field horizontally and vertically. Even so, the position is far from a liability. With the right deployment and improved cohesion, the safeties can give the defense a solid backbone. And if the younger option who has been adjusting to the role continues to settle in, the ceiling becomes much higher than people might realize. Watching him develop week by week feels like watching someone who could eventually anchor the secondary. The cornerback room, however, sits in a more uncertain place. You can see the effort. You can see flashes of strong individual performances, and you can even see potential in certain matchups, but the gap between the top corner and the rest of the group is too wide to ignore. The number one option clearly carries the load and holds his own against some of the better receivers in the league, but the supporting cast has difficulty maintaining consistency. One corner plays with confidence and physicality, but still has too many lapses to be fully trusted every down. Another has the quickness and technique you want, but does not always match the mental sharpness needed to anticipate deeper developing plays. The veteran in the room understands angles and positioning, but does not quite have the burst or recovery speed to function as a reliable outside presence against high-caliber passing attacks. That is where the problem emerges. It is not that the corners are bad. It is that the overall composition of the group does not create the balance a secondary needs when facing diverse offenses. Some are better in man coverage, others only feel comfortable in zone, and the mesh between their skills is not as seamless as you would hope. When the defense leans heavily into man coverage, certain weaknesses show up. When it shifts into zone, other vulnerabilities appear. It becomes a puzzle where the pieces do not click together as cleanly as you want, especially when facing teams that know how to isolate mismatches and force the second and third corners into uncomfortable roles. And even though the younger corner continues to develop, he alone cannot mask every gap. Evaluating the entire defense as a unit, though, you start to see how the strengths in one area help compensate for the questions in another. The defensive front brings so much pressure and disruption that it naturally reduces the time corners must hold coverage. When the rush hits its stride and collapses a pocket quickly, even a secondary with imperfections can survive longer drives. But when the pass rush stalls or the run defense gets pushed back, the corners are exposed for longer stretches, and that is where some problems become obvious. This is not unique to this team. It is a league-wide reality that defenses often rely on synergy to hide flaws. Here, the synergy is strong but not perfect. One thing that stands out across all these discussions is how quickly the narrative around a team can swing after a single loss. One rough game, and suddenly fans question every position group, every coach, every scheme. But the truth is rarely that dramatic. A team sitting slightly above 500 is not falling apart. It is competing, battling, adjusting, and fighting through the highs and lows of a long season. Just because one Sunday went sideways does not mean everything beneath the surface is broken. Football has always been a sport that amplifies emotions, but the reality is usually far more steady than the weekly reactions suggest. When you zoom out and think only about the current season, without projecting into the future or worrying about upcoming contracts or who might be here next year, the picture becomes clearer. Certain positions are stable and trending upward. Others need improvement or fresh talent. But even the weaker areas are not catastrophic. They simply highlight where upgrades could make the biggest impact when the time comes to evaluate the next steps for the roster. The team is not built to mirror the legendary dynasties of the past or replicate those iconic Pittsburgh squads that dominated eras. Instead, it is a roster shaped for competing right now, growing together, and trying to find the right combinations that spark consistency. And that is why these conversations matter so much. Fans want to know where the team stands, where it's strong, where it struggles, and what positions might hold the key to unlocking a higher level of performance. Every season is its own story, and this one feels like a chapter where the team is trying to solidify its identity. Some pieces are already in place, some are on the rise, and some are still searching for the right rhythm. It is a long process built snap by snap, and understanding each part of the roster helps paint the full picture of where this team can go next. So when you add everything up, you get a team with real strengths, real weaknesses, and enough talent across the board to stay competitive in almost any matchup. The question, as always, is how consistently all of these pieces can be put together on the same day. The roster might not be flawless, and the path to becoming a true championship contender is still being built, but the foundation is stronger than people think. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to Steelers Nation Central and hit the like button on this video. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the news in the comments below. The air surrounding the franchise's facility has been thick with nervous energy, but the latest intelligence filtering out from behind the steel doors isn't just a rumor. It's an earthquake. Whispers coalesced into a full-blown roar yesterday, confirming that the Pittsburgh Steelers executed an 11th-hour total overhaul of their strategic game plan, an unprecedented move made under the cover of darkness. This wasn't a minor adjustment to an offensive package or a slight tweak to coverage schemes. Sources within the organization, all speaking on condition of anonymity, fearing professional exile, describe it as a radical strategic pivot, a desperate Hail Mary designed to catch their formidable opponents completely off guard. The reverberations have sent shockwaves through the fan base, which is now oscillating wildly between absolute panic and a cautious, almost manic, optimism that only the black and gold faithful can generate. It is understood that the dramatic shift was decided upon following a series of clandestine, late-night meetings involving the head coach and a select circle of veteran staff members. The lights in the war room reportedly burned until the first rays of dawn, and when the players arrived for their final walkthrough, they were presented with a playbook that was, in essence, entirely new. The rumor mill is churning with feverish speculation about the specifics. Is the veteran signal caller suddenly being asked to abandon his methodical approach in favor of an aggressive, downfield air raid? Has the defensive coordinator completely scrapped the celebrated blitz package for a zone-heavy, bend-but-don't-break philosophy? Whatever the exact nature of the change, the internal tension is palpable. Reports suggest several key players, including a high-profile offensive lineman, expressed considerable confusion and resistance to the abrupt changes, questioning the wisdom of ditching weeks of preparation for a high-stakes encounter. The coaching staff, however, is said to be united in their decision, believing that the conventional approach had been fully scouted and neutralized by their adversary, necessitating this high-risk, high-reward gambit. The media scrum outside the facility is bordering on hysteria, and the lack of official comment is only fueling the fire. A well-placed source, describing the scene inside the locker room, noted a strange mixture of focused intensity and bewildered anxiety. It's like they're preparing for a game they've never studied for, the source claimed. The risk here is monumental. If the move pays off, the coaching staff will be hailed as tactical geniuses. If it fails, the immediate future of the franchise could be plunged into a period of extreme uncertainty. The consensus among league pundits, who have had their prognostications thrown into immediate disarray, is that this is either a stroke of brilliant desperation or an act of self-sabotage. For the thousands of loyalists preparing to witness the spectacle, the only certainty is that the game they are about to see will be wholly unpredictable, dictated by a secret plan hatched in the deepest quiet of the night. The uncertainty is the strategy, and the hope is that this calculated chaos is exactly what the Steelers need. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Pittsburgh Steelers, make sure to subscribe to Steelers Nation Central and give this video a like. We always look forward to hearing your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.